let's get into this. Welcome to the Spirituality and Mysticism podcast, and it is January the 13th, and there's just been an impeachment vote a couple hours ago, and we're gonna try to post this really soon, so that maybe tomorrow or the next day, so that this will be fresh for everybody. But we thought that it would be good to look at and examine what is going on around us from a spiritual and mystical kind of sense. And I kind of wanted to start by talking about how my experience has been very different with this since I've been practicing some of these spiritual disciplines and exercises. So like I try to fast every day. I do intermittent fasting. So I try to fast every day for like 16 or 18 hours. And then I journal every day, and I've been meditating every day, sometimes twice. And I used the prayer of what was Teresa's prayer? The prayer of like, it's just been so draining to me to just watch people say terrible things about each other, and to watch people that I care about dehumanize one another and me. Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty empathetic. I'm not as empathetic as some other people, but I feel just for the last week, I've been just so drained, just no energy, I'm sleeping like a lot. And, it's very weird. It's just been a very weird experience for me.
Yeah. What do they call it? Like trauma fatigue, or what do they always call it back in the day? I forgot what they said.
And
there's some kind of fatigue.
And I guess to me, it comes down a lot to people have different information, and people act and think on this information, and they think for such a long time we have operated in a place where we all kind of got the same information for a long time. I mean, there was 3 channels. We all got those channels. We all saw the same news. We liked certain ones more than another for whatever reasons. And then, cable started, and we started to get more news channels. Now there's 24-hour news channels. It used to just take an hour to tell us the news. Now it takes 24 hours to tell us that same news. And we're all hearing different things. Like, and I think I've talked about it on this podcast before. I was getting my oil changed in Los Alamos, New Mexico, which is not a hotbed of conservatism, but it definitely has some, conservatism. They're scientists and people that think very, linearly. And I went to get my oil change, and there was this TV channel that was playing and was very, very, very right-wing news, almost scary. And they're just saying all this stuff about what we should be afraid of, and how we're being controlled, and how we're like, be afraid of this, be afraid of that. And it's stuff that I knew wasn't really true, but it was true enough that they could prove some of it. And it was crazy to me when I left there. I'm like, man, if this was the news I was watching, I would believe things totally differently than what I'm believing now. And they helped me kind of get it, but it doesn't really help me solve anything or do anything.
What has really struck me recently is how hung up people are about their own rights. And one thing that I think sort of the mystical and especially the contemplative spirituality within Christianity and outside of Christianity, one of the things it really does for me is it takes me to a place where I would not lead with my own rights or even protecting my own rights. I'm very interested in the rights of others, and especially those who have been denied rights and who have been oppressed, who are without rights. But I feel like I'm at a place where to champion for my own rights is just not. I think it's probably because my ego has been a little sabotaged, I hope, by contemplative practice. And so I'm just, that's not where my mind goes anymore. And so I think of things like, for instance, right now, there's a whole lot of my friends on all sides that are sort of talking about free speech right now. And I'm not going to try to make this political. I'm just going to tell you what I'm trying to share with listeners is how my contemplative practice has shaped my view of that for myself, and not get into anybody else's business. Because ultimately, this is what contemplation does, right? It changes me, and then I can speak to my community about that.
Sure.
And I think it's really I've done in these past years, a lot of silent practice, centering prayer, which someday we'll get a little bit more into other things. And so for me, it's sort of like, I'm not so interested in my right to free speech, as I am this sort of counter idea of maybe it's not about a right to free speech, but it's about my opportunity to not speak at all as a Christian, to embrace silence, to listen, not necessarily to all the news media like you were talking about, Todd, but to the voice of God in the midst of it and where God would lead me to. But that really does sort of shift the conversation, and it really shifts my response to it. That when I hear these things, like my right to whatever it is, and for myself, I just kind of think like, I don't want to think about myself in that way. I don't want to defend that right. I think it's really about like, the example of Jesus is very much an example of surrendering his rights, in order to move himself and us with him into this other terrain and a whole different conversation. And it really is a very different conversation to sort of move away from, my right to say anything, to maybe the invitation to be silent is more important than any sort of, right. And that's just, that's something that I've sort of been responding inside myself. That's something that the contemplative and mystical tradition is working in me, is just kind of changing the whole narrative and the whole discourse, at least within my own heart, and sort of what I'm about and what I'm after, so that I really feel like it's again, like I said, I think there's a great role in defending the rights of others. I don't know that once you get to a certain point, spiritually or in Christianity, especially if you're coming to it from a place of some privilege, I think there's a great invitation to sort of surrender that whole defense of rights for this other way of being, an other kind of conversation. And I think that's been really helpful to me, and it's shifted me into some different places as everything swirls around.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense or if that's helpful, but that's kind of one of the things I've been thinking about recently.
So Todd has the right to be silent.
The invitation to be.
I'm just talking about like he's going to be arrested. He's going to be arrested. You have the right to be silent.
Yeah. And I think, Todd, I think you shared this before we started recording, Todd, so people didn't hear you say it. I think it was before we started recording, but you said something in a conversation with us about sort of how other people are expecting you to speak.
Yes.
And it's sort of like, no, you don't get to have that power. I am invited to silence if I so choose. But then trying to articulate to people how that's not, because silence can also side with the oppressor, and so it's a tricky. Silence is a very tricky thing right now.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel like if I'm going to talk about silence, I need to say that silence is about my rights, but silence, you can also use silence to retreat from advocating for the rights of others, and especially those who really need that advocacy. And I think that is improper mysticism, because mystics have always been advocates for others. And I think there's a real balance there. So I hope that was similar.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was gonna piggyback on that too, because like Richard Rohr would tell you that the Center for Action and Contemplation, the most important word in that is the and. I think I've said that before. Because the contemplation is useless without action, but the action is not even founded properly unless it's within contemplation. And so you don't become professional yellers if it's all action, or only doers, but you actually have the contemplation piece, and the contemplation piece is what fuels the action piece. And so I love the Franciscans when they say, we will always read the Bible from the point of view of the poor or the oppressed, because they believe, and I agree with them, that it was always written from that point of view, and from the losers of history instead of the winners. And so I think it's very, very, very important to make sure that we are speaking up as a voice for those that are downtrodden, Sermon on the Mount kinds of stuff, those who mourn, and things like that, but also visiting those in prison, and visiting those that need to be clothed, and all those different things. And so and the sad thing is the conversations that I'm hearing today, they jump really fast, really deep into something other than that. And so a lot of times if I do raise my voice, which I will, but I will only do it with lots and lots of silent and lots of listening, like Todd was saying. Like, I don't know if Todd said this when we were recording or not, but Todd said, I've just learned that I'm just going to ask a bunch of questions. I'm just going to learn from people. I want to see, why do you think that? And what's that purpose of that? And, but there will come a time where my voice will be, I will speak up, but it's the only time I will speak up is if it's for those in need, those that are in need. And so if I have to speak up, I really will try to just keep the focus on that aspect of it all. And is that conversation political? Yes, of course. I mean, there's a lot of politics that are involved in, just the discrepancies between the rich and the poor, and things like that. But when it comes to, Christian nationalism, which I think is what a lot of it has kind of gone into on one side, and then Christian anarchism, possibly on the other side. and so it's just interesting to me to be able to. I'm with you, Todd. Like I really do feel like, blessed are those who are the peacemakers, for their life is going to be extremely difficult. It's like, this is going to be, it's almost like being a prophet. You're going to get shat upon over and over and over and over again. It's just, when you're dealing with things that people don't want to hear and don't believe, then all you can do is to be the voice. But I make sure that the voice is not, I try to keep it grounded in in the scriptures. But I will be the first one to say, if there's ever a vote, I'm going to vote on the poor, on the side of the poor. I'm going to vote on the side of the oppressed. But yeah, so I mean, it's difficult though, because you're right, Todd. I mean, Tiffany. I don't know if anyone's been reading any of Tiffany's Facebook posts, but Tiffany is pretty outspoken. She likes to be very outspoken, and she's, oh my gosh, I mean, you talk about dehumanizing comments on social media and things like that, and then people, of course, the people who love her want to come to her defense and they want to argue, and I'm just like, and you'll hardly ever see me on there, because most of the time I'm like, she can handle herself. Like, she could probably handle it more than I could. But I intentionally have been a little bit more quiet, or a lot more quiet than what she has, at least on social media. But she felt like she needed to be that voice, and I think it's very much of a prophetic kind of a thing for her, to be able to speak what she sees as truth, actual truth. But yeah, I mean, it's always a challenge to be able to go through those things, but being a peacemaker is a lot like being a prophet. It's just, you're risking getting your head chopped off over and over and over again. And so, everyone always thinks that contemplatives are just, maybe there's a reason why the desert fathers and mothers left and went to the desert, because they're like, all right, the world is just lost it. It's just like, they're just crazy. I'm going to go spend time with Jesus. And I'm going to go live in a little dugout, or a cave or something somewhere. Maybe they had the right idea. Maybe the Amish were correct all along, but just to get out of the way of society and just move on. But I don't know. I still think that there needs to be the voice for the brokenhearted and the poor. And I think that God uses those who truly are spending enough time in prayer, in contemplation. My dog's agreeing with me over there. To be able to be that voice, but to only be that voice when that voice needs to be heard. And a lot of times in the world we live in today, I really question if my voice would ever even be heard in either side, or all 12 sides, or all 35 sides. And so that's the challenge that I present to a lot of people, including my wife. She'll say, well, what do you think about this? And I'm just saying, well, I'm called to love everyone, even those I despise, and especially those that despise me. But it doesn't mean that I'm loving them without making sure that where repentance needs to be provided and forgiveness needs to be provided. Yeah. And I started off also, if I do get in those conversations, I started off with saying, hey, maybe I need you to forgive me. It's funny, like I put up a post that triggered some family members of mine, and he said, I can't believe that you would do that, blah 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 blah, or one person did. And and all I put was, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And of course, he assumed that I was only speaking of the people we were talking about. But why couldn't that be everyone's prayer, even on either side? Like, maybe if I had enough love of the other, that I would desire for God to forgive them and to love them and to find repentance and refine, restoration in somehow, some way. And if that is the case, then I can love someone, but I can also speak to their actions and to be able to say, no, that's not correct. At least I do not believe that is, something that God would agree with. But I can still love somebody in the midst of that. And it's not an easy love. It's not a fun love, but it is a love. Like, I still do care for people who have made really horrendous choices. Whether they knew it or not. I mean, there's a reason why in the Old Testament that they actually had, one of the sacrifices was, the scapegoat. The scapegoat was supposed to be all those sins that you didn't even know you committed. We're going to throw, onto this animal. And it's just one of those things to where it's just like they acknowledge the fact that they might actually be missing the mark without even realizing it. And so, it was after, honestly, it was after I watched we talked about this. I think we talked about this. Didn't we talk about this? The Great Hack, and the other documentary about social media and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. That's when I really God kind of just said, see, maybe it's not their fault. Maybe they don't know that they're actually doing it. Maybe they have been given information that they are simply taking as truth, whether it might not have been or was. And so that they've actually been, I'm not going to say brainwashed, but they definitely have been influenced to where they're not able to make decisions on their own. And so I would, my desire would be that Pharaoh would wake up, that Pharaoh would be able to see that God cares about Pharaoh and cares about Pharaoh's people, and instead of having to send all these plagues and and all these different things, I still desire to love them. And I think it starts with love, and I think it's going to end with love. But I also believe that there are some times where entire generations have to pass away before any of the love stuff can actually kick in and become a reality. And people don't want to hear that. But
yeah, in a world where we don't know what's true or not, like what's going to get us through, like we're not ever going to know. Like this is just the beginning of this. Like, information and the amount of knowledge and information that is out there and that is going to be out there, like we're not getting better at this. Like this is getting worse, and this is going to happen more. We have to figure out how to navigate this now, or we're going to be ill prepared in the future because we're not going to agree on what's real anymore. And Len Sweet talked about how touch is going to be a super important thing in the future because there's going to be holograms and there's going to be robots and there's going to be things. And to really know that a person is really there to touch them is going to be super important. And I think that like we're just starting to get into this, and we have to. I'm seeing this as a much bigger picture issue than this one thing, and I feel really guilt tripped into, well, every pastor is irresponsible if they're not talking about this and this Sunday, like that kind of guilt, and even self, like I feel privileged. I feel I'm a straight white male. Like I feel some guilt, honestly, anyway. And so I like what John's saying about, sticking up for the rights of other people. I feel much more comfortable with that, with what both of y'all are saying. And I don't feel the need to be silent, but I want the option to be silent in certain ways. Like it does not seem like a bold stand to me to stand up and say, like, white supremacy is wrong, white supremacy is vile, white supremacy is evil. For you to think that you are better than another creation of God because of the color of your skin or who your parents were or where you were born is crazy to me. It's crazy to me that people think that way. It's wrong, it's evil, it's vile, it's gross, it's reprehensible, it's a bad, terrible thing. But it does not make me feel bold to stand up and say that, because I feel like that's something we all could kind of agree, or most of us could kind of agree on. And so for me to stand up and announce that seems it makes me feel like I'm virtue signaling, like, hey, I'm against white supremacy, look at me. And all of a sudden I'm making it about me.
Yeah.
Making it about the people that are really affected by this. And that grosses me out. Like that doesn't feel right to me. And I would never tell another person, you better do this, or you're a bad pastor, or you're a bad liberal, or you're a bad person. And that's how I feel. And even just when I ask people questions, like what DG was referring to, like, man, like I can't even just ask a question without being like, where I feel like I'm really piled on from anybody that has a strong view on any side of this. If I'm not on their side, it really did change, because Jesus says in two different occasions, right? If they're not against us, they're with us, right? And then another time he says, if they're not for us, they're against us. And so I feel like I've just experienced that shift where I kind of felt like we're all like, okay, well, as long as you're not this, you're okay. And now it's like, well, if you're not one of us, you're not okay. And things have shifted. And a major thing happened. In no way do I condone, in no way do I feel like that's another thing we can all agree on. We should not be violently overthrowing the Capitol. We shouldn't kill people. We shouldn't steal. We shouldn't commit adultery. We shouldn't, like, I feel like these things should go without saying. And I'm not afraid to say those things. I don't feel like it takes any courage of me to stand up against white supremacy. And so to do that when I don't feel like I have anything constructive to add to the conversation, it's terrible. People that are white supremacists, there's something wrong with their minds. There's something, I don't know what causes it. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know how to fix it. So I don't really know what to say about it, right? But I can listen, and I'd love to listen honestly to white supremacists and try to see where they're coming from, and try to, to see where's that anger really coming from? Is this person mentally ill? Is this person, were they brought up with abuse in such a way that they're wired now to think this or whatever? Is there hope in trying to change people's hearts? Almost every single person I talk to tell me there's no hope in changing people's hearts. We just have to fight. And I don't know that I believe that, and I don't know that that's consistent with the gospel that I read. And I don't know that I want to believe that. Because if that's the choice, we just have to, I mean, if the only way to get rid of white supremacy is to harm or imprison or whatever white supremacists, like if that's the only way, then that's a totally different approach that we're taking. But then we have to make that decision, I guess, on what we're going to do, because we're just sitting around talking about it and saying, well, I'm against white supremacy. Are you against white supremacy? It seems really silly to me. Of course we are. Like, I feel like, of course, like, I feel like it goes without saying, but maybe it doesn't. And maybe I need to say something about it, but I don't know what to say. Because it's anybody that knows me knows I think that, I hope. And if they don't,
Right.
I need to act different. I need to live my life different. I shouldn't have to announce, hey, I'm against, I'm against doing terrible things. and I feel so much pressure to do that. And I feel like now I'm people's enemies because I don't feel like that's the right. I feel like we have to talk and listen and change people's hearts, or let God change people's hearts, or like talk about where things are coming from. And sometimes that means not taking a big stand on something, which is new for me. My whole life I've been in destruction mode and taking a stand mode. And I don't care what you think, I'm going to stand for what's right mode. And now that I'm getting older, I'm about creating. I want to create. I don't want to destroy anymore. I don't want to tear down. I get it. I'm glad people will do. I'm glad people are angry about white supremacy, like I am. I want it to go away. But I need to fight that battle in a way that I can win that battle. And me just going around saying white supremacy is bad does not make me feel empowered to actually help fight the thing, even though it is bad and it is terrible. And I'm glad people are standing up and saying it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that there are, most of my friends that, I have to deal, like all my Black friends have had to deal with that their whole life, kind of a thing. All I could ever say to them, and I say it all the time, I'm like, hey man, if there is any possible way that I could let you borrow my white privilege card, please just tell me when you need it, and I'll do the best I can to hand it off to you. Like, and I don't, if you need me to speak, then that's fine. But I think more than anything else, I want you to do the speaking, not me do the speaking for you, but you do the speaking. So if someone gives me a mic, I want to put it in your hands, not mine. But you're right, Todd. I mean, it's not easy. It's not.
Yeah. We actually need to move to last words pretty quick here already.
Yeah.
But, and so maybe these are my last words, but as you talk, Todd, and listen to you, DG, just a couple, hopefully these are quick things occur to me. One is that unfortunately, I think we do live in a world in which we have to be clear about things because we know, I mean, we just don't live in a world where we can take for granted that people do know, unless they're really close friends of ours, where we stand, or, I mean, Christianity has a long legacy of being co-opted by other human agendas. And I'm quite convinced we're at a time in history where that's massively happening again. And so because of both the history and because of that tendency for history to repeat itself, I do think we're in times when we have to be really clear about things for people, and we can't assume people know where we're coming from. I mean, I even think it was a shock to both this congregation I serve now and the last one when I told them, you cannot assume people know that they are welcome to show up on Sunday morning to your services, because I have had conversations with people who asked me, well, could I just come? And some of you listeners probably have that same sort of thing. Religious people take for granted a ton of things that they know are true about their own perspective, or they think are universally accepted as part of their faith tradition, and that's just no longer the case. So I think we do have to be extra clear, and that's part of the issue that we're struggling with. I think the second thing is what I said about ego. I think for me, there's this question when I feel like I need to take a stance or say something, and the question is, am I saying this for my own ego so that people tell me I'm a good boy? Or am I saying this because I need to advocate for others? And if I can discern the difference, then that's a huge difference. Because if I'm going to say this so you think I'm a good boy, I probably need to just shut up, because that's serving something in me that I don't need to serve.
Yeah.
But if I'm saying it truly, not for my own self or so I get strokes or a pat on the back, but because other people need to hear me say this, then I think that makes a huge difference. And for me, as part of my discernment, when do I speak and when do I not? And then the third and final thing I would say is, Todd, as you talked about, what is truth and how we know things. I think one of the biggest challenges probably for people of faith, and especially within the Christian family, is we are still so hung up, and we're in this legacy where knowledge and knowing is about the mind and the intellect and facts, when that's really not our legacy. That in Scripture, to know is to be intimate, to know God, right? Adam knew his wife Eve. That didn't mean he knew factoids about her. It meant they achieved intimacy. And so, but I think there's something really profound in that, to say that maybe part of the hang-up is we're talking past each other because we're thinking that knowledge and knowing and truth is up here. And if we can get it shifted to this other realm of what knowing means and what it is and what it invites us into, that makes a huge difference. Those are my final words, those three areas. That was longer than I meant to take, sorry.
I like that a lot. And I think that's very helpful. It's very helpful to me. And to think about it in those ways. Because I don't know, it's, Kenny Rogers is my favorite theologian, and knowing when to hold them and when to fold them is, I think, one of the greatest spiritual disciplines that we need to figure out, and I think that's really huge. And I think that we have to be careful not to tell other people where their voice belongs or doesn't belong.
Yeah.
And I think that we have to be open to being able to have conversations. Maybe it's just too fresh. Maybe I don't need to be asking questions of people this early. Maybe it's a timing thing. Maybe I need to be more silent and not even, ask questions, because people are just emotional and they're acting unemotionally. I know this. I should just let them get it out, and then we can come around later and we can maybe have conversations about it. Maybe I'm talking too much, honest. And where I feel like I'm saying less than I'm expected to say, I think maybe I'm saying even too much. And I just want to, be able to have conversations with people that I don't agree with. And I want other people to be able to have conversations with people that they don't agree with. And I want us to be able to understand each other and love each other through all this. But that doesn't excuse things that are wrong, either, and things that I think are wrong either. And so I need to find a way to do that. But I think that comes through those spiritual practices and those things. And so those are my final thoughts.
My final thought, and I think I've mentioned this before, but it's my lifelong desire to live into, is the greatest commandment. When, they ask Jesus, what's the most important commandment out of all 200 and whatever? And Jesus says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then the second is like it, and that is like it is an equaling statement. So it should be translated as, in other words, love your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus went on to explain who the neighbor was. And the neighbor was not the one living next door that you take food to when they're sick. The neighbor's the one that's beating you and watching you, not beating you, but the ones that you think are going to beat you, and yet are the ones that indeed end up being the hands and feet and voice of Jesus. And so I just constantly attempt to live into that when it comes to my relationships with other people, that if I want to love God, I'm loving people. That is the way I love God, is by loving people. Even more especially the ones that I might disagree with, is that love. And that's how I show love to my God. So that's my final words. pray us out of here, John?
Yeah, I am. So I'm going to use the prayer. I think I've used it before, but it's what I close every time I lead centering prayer a few times a week. And this is the prayer that we close with every time we end. And so let me offer this one. My Lord and my God, take from me everything that distances me from you. My Lord and my God, give me everything that brings me closer to you. My Lord and my God, detach me from myself to give my all to you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, guys.